A Liar's Autobiography, the untrue story of Monty Python's Graham Chapman. If you know Monty Python's Flying Circus, then you're probably familiar with the first dead member of the group, Graham Chapman. As he did both perform in and wrote many memorable sketches, fans might remember him most as either the co-writer of the Dead Parrot sketch, the Colonel.
Quite agree, silly. Right, get on with it.
The Lady That Doesn't Like Spam.
What do you mean? I don't like spam!
Or even playing the leads like in Monty Python and the Holy Grail and The Life of Brian. Sadly, he did die at an early age of 48 due to tonsil and spinal cancer, but his legacy among the Pythons and British comedy would forever live on. However, in 2012, a company called Bill and Ben Productions decided to have a crazy idea of adapting Chapman and his partner David Sherlock's book, A Liar's Autobiography, Volume 6, into an animated feature, and even bring in most of the Monty Python members to do the voices. As a Monty Python fan myself, I am quite curious to know what madness with this little project has in store. So now that we got Graham's twisted and most likely fake life story into animation, will it be as glorious as finding the Holy Grail, or should we stop all this because it's too silly? Let's find out! The story. When adapting a biography of a Monty Python member, you can either go in one of two directions. One is the straightforward serious tone that explains the true events that happened, and the other is a flat-out feature-length Monty Python sketch where it rejects logic and would just go crazy. The film would seem to land right in the middle, where it incorporates some truth into it, but can have its moments where it wants to be silly. While I understand the tone that it wants to pull off, having a bit of both is not a good idea. The two tones that I mentioned before are not just different, but are complete opposites. In the right hands, they can work, but they don't work well together. As a result, the movie is left with a story where the only thing audiences can do is just guess which scenes are actually telling the truth and which ones are just nonsense. It doesn't help either that the timeline is inconsistent, where it would be talking about the genesis of Monty Python in one scene, and then in the next it would suddenly go back in time where Graham was attending Cambridge. It's like if the film threw a random puzzle set on the floor and asked the people watching to solve it, leaving them not only to guess which pieces fit where, but also having a difficult time trying to see the big picture.
How much were you drinking?
4 pints of gin a day.
4 pints of gin a day?
Yes.
I didn't know Graham was an alcoholic. Did you?
Yeah, why was that, do you think?
However, I don't really blame either the directing or the writing. It's more the format that it's trying to follow. You see, the film is driven by Chapman's own voiceovers of his book that he did back in 1986. In a way, it's Graham himself that's the driving force of this feature, and the filmmakers would have to work around it instead of those recordings working for them. But some of you might wonder about one aspect of this film, the humor. Well, considering how the tone is as stable as an expected Spanish Inquisition...
Nobody expects the Spanish Inquisition!
It can have some chuckle-worthy moments, but it can mostly feel like a rejected dull bit from the show. The story will give you the knowledge about Graham Chapman, where you'll come out knowing as much as you did coming in. The animation. One unique element about this movie is that the animation was done by 14 different studios, each presenting a completely unique style from one another. Not only that, but they would also use a variety of mediums, where some would have 2D animation, some would use CGI, and others would do something completely different. This would normally be done in anthology films where they each tell their own story, but in here, it's all connected to tell the life of Graham Chapman. For the sake of this review, allow me to take a look at them in the order of their animation types. For the most part, the 2D segments rely on having a design that's either simple or go in a more realistic route, while the people would move like if it was done in Adobe Animate for a TV series. In the computer animated segments, the star component is the character animation, where it maybe matters on how they look, but it's more important on how they move and how it is smooth and expressive. As for the miscellaneous, you have a little stop motion bit, one that gives the feeling that every frame is painted, one that pays homage to Terry Gilliam's cutout animation, and some that would mix mediums like having 2D characters in a 3D background.
They combined to produce an atmosphere so redolent of this type of writing.
Watching these different styles come in one after another is great, and it gives the animators a moment to shine, but with the way this movie handles them, they can have some issues. Not surprisingly, this is not a big budgeted animated feature, so it is noticeable that many of them have a limited quality. Now, that can easily be passable, but what is not is how the art styles are thinly connected to the movie itself. There's no real point as to why there are so many styles in this one film, like not even to set up a mood or something, and no real order either. Some only have a few minutes to show off, while others are used multiple times or take up a large chunk of the film. Sure, it's not the best use of an animation variety, but it is still a noble effort. The characters. If you would have to find the best way to explain someone who Graham Chapman is, this movie is definitely not it. While the film is purely about him, it only delivers the bare bones of his description as a person. What I understood about Chapman from this movie is that he studied medicine but didn't pursue to be a doctor. He worked on Monty Python's Flying Circus with his longtime friend John Cleese. He was totally gay. He drank a lot. He had a lot of sex with both men and women. And that's pretty much it. While I understand looking into the psychology of his personal life, the movie fails to highlight the key moments and achievements that made him the Monty Python member we know him today. It shows a lot of him, but it doesn't teach people much about him. As for the other people, there really isn't a lot to say. The movie is so focused on Graham that everyone else is like a really minor role that only appears in the movie for 5 minutes max. The only people that do play a larger role are Chapman's partner, David Sherlock, his parents, and John Cleese. But like I said before, because it doesn't get into the important parts of his life, the people around Chapman don't feel important either. In a way, they're like a one-night stand. They come in, serve one function, do something to Chapman, and then leaves with no impact regarding them as a person. An interesting thing to note that I've already mentioned, though, is that most of the voices here are actually from the Pythons themselves. With only Eric Idle that wasn't on board with the film, it features the voices of John Cleese, Terry Jones, Michael Palin, Carol Cleveland, Terry Gilliam, and as I've said before, the old recordings of Chapman himself. With that said, next to the animation, the voice acting here could be the most entertaining factor of this film. They're all well done, and the reason why it can have some funny moments, including a scene with Sigmund Freud voiced by none other than Cameron Diaz.
Clearly indicates a yearning for a pre-rational animal state of existence in which navigation is not yet distinguishable.
But even with great voice acting, it is still a bad move for characters in a biographical film to leave little impact. It's not that good, to be honest. A Liar's Autobiography, the untrue story of Monty Python's Graham Chapman, fails to deliver a biography that highlights the achievement of Chapman, and fails to capture the spirit of Monty Python's Flying Circus. It is a movie that lacks focus in its tone and style, where it would leave audiences confused as a cat, not knowing if this should be taken seriously or if it's all for the sake of pure silliness. However, I would be hesitant to say that this is a bad film. It does provide a nice variety of animation styles and great voice acting to at least get some form of substance out of this. I'll just say right now that if you're not a Monty Python fan or just not familiar with the show, this movie is not for you. For those who are fans though, maybe this is worth watching at least once to say that you did. But if you ever need something to watch that has legit Monty Python knowledge, there are some good documentaries out there that chronicles the making of and the legacy of the legendary comedy group, sprinkled with some of that famous humor. Like It's the Monty Python Story and Almost the Truth Lawyer's Cut. And now for something completely different. A series of little numbers that lead to a big number presented with ominous music. Hey guys, this is AniMat's, and like I said before, I am a huge Monty Python fan. I love watching the series. I would consider Monty Python a huge comedic influence, and also one of my favorite comedies is actually Monty Python and the Holy Grail. So I was definitely quite excited to see this movie in particular. I have heard of it, but it really did tickle my curiosity to know what this is all about, what they wanted to do with the story of Graham Chapman. And with what they presented, yeah, it's really not all that much per se. I mean, sure, I do like the animation, and the voice acting is definitely great. It's just everything else, it just leaves you completely confused. If you've seen the comedic sketch Confuse a Cat, which, by the way, is one of my favorite Monty Python sketches, it pretty much leaves you like that. It pretty much leaves you as confused as the cat, that you don't know what you're watching and you don't know which aspects of Graham Chapman's life is real and fake within this movie. I had to go and personally do research myself on him to know which elements are actually true, which there are some in there, but a lot of them is just kind of filler. But I will say right now, though, that if you guys are interested in checking something out of Graham Chapman and see a lot of his personal highlights, well, the most that I can honestly recommend is actually a DVD called Graham Chapman's Personal Best. Now, this was actually a part of a collection back in the mid-2000s of Monty Python's Personal Best. And of course, this is a collection of 6 DVDs that highlight the best moments of each member of Monty Python. My personal favorite DVD of mine is actually with Eric Idles. But with Graham Chapman's, sure, they don't really highlight a lot of his movie works, like what he did in The Holy Grail and The Life of Brian, but at least in that one, what they would do is that they would highlight a lot of his performances in the Monty Python Flying Circus TV show. And at least with that one, you will learn some of his influences and what he would put onto the table with the TV series. So that is definitely a good alternative if you want to go and learn the comedic influence that Graham Chapman had in Monty Python's Flying Circus and in British comedy in general. So with all that said, though, that's pretty much it with Graham Chapman right now. And now it is time that we shall go and move on to a Patreon request. Yes, and this time right over here, we are going to be doing a request from Dave Birkins. So I just want to start things off by saying that if you guys would like to be like Dave and you want to go and support my work and get some awesome rewards at the same time, including seeing my videos before anyone else, then all you have to do is go to patreon.com/animat. However, I would also like to remind you that if you guys would like to suggest an animated film you would like me to review and I would put onto the animation hat, then all you have to do is go write me an email at animatsreviews@gmail.com. So, with all that said, you might be wondering, what is it that Dave requests me to do? What is the movie that he would want me to go and talk about? Well, interestingly enough, It's from a well-known animator, but this guy is actually more known to do adult animation. But with this one right over here, he would claim that this would be his first family picture, but honestly, looking at the content that he put in there, yeah, like he would restrain himself compared to his other films, but yeah, I don't know if even I would call that a family picture.
It may be tomorrow, but only time will tell. Somewhere in darkness.
Good riddance to him, the freeloading bastard. I hope he's shot.